Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to our explainer on women and men core differences. So today, we're attempting something honestly pretty rare. We're going to try to understand human patterns without falling into those toxic, oversimplified debates that we see literally everywhere. We're going to unpack exactly what the source material reveals, keep a totally open mind, and build a wholesome, balanced understanding of how we as humans actually operate. Now, you might be wondering, why does this topic always feel so incredibly tricky? Because let's face it, conversations about men and women can get messy and fast. You know the drill. You say one thing and suddenly you're defending a point you never even meant to make. It's so frustrating. But the source explains that this confusion actually starts because we constantly blur multiple, complex layers together. People tend to jump straight from, hey, some differences exist, to, well, this is just how all women are, or this is just how all men are. And right there, that jump, that's where the whole thing breaks down. Think of it kind of like looking down at a busy city's traffic during rush hour from a helicopter. If you look from way up high, everything just looks like one giant blurry flow, right? It's chaotic and you completely miss all the actual moving parts. But zoom in, and suddenly the system makes total sense. You start seeing the buses on their set routes, the individual pedestrians making their own choices, the stoplights controlling the rhythm, and the side roads altering the flow. Human behavior works exactly the same way. If you only look from afar, you're going to miss the distinct machinery underneath that actually drives the patterns we're seeing. So what exactly is that machinery? Well, our source breaks human behavior down into three distinct forces. First up, biology. This is really about the body's patterns and constraints, things like hormones or neurological baselines that kind of set the physical stage for us. Second is psychology. These are our personal habits of thinking, feeling, and responding, usually based on our own individual experiences and, yeah, sometimes past traumas. And third is culture. This represents what a society teaches, rewards, or expects from us, like those unwritten rules about politeness or ambition. Every single human behavior is a mix of these three forces, and we're going to keep analyzing these core ingredients throughout our explainer today. Now, what's really interesting about this next section is how we start redefining difference. We are looking at a shift in pattern, not a hard wall. Because when people hear the word difference, they almost always imagine these fixed boxes. They assume, women equal one exact set of traits and men equal another completely separate set. But the reality? Real human differences are almost never absolute rules. Instead, they're much more like overlapping waves. Think about something like physical height or risk-taking. While one group might show a bit more of a certain trait on average, there's this massive, undeniable overlap between individuals in both groups. The averages might shift slightly, sure, but that shared human middle ground is just enormous. To really visualize this, imagine two massive piles of library books. One pile might have way more novels in it, while the other might have mostly textbooks. But if you actually look closely, both piles contain a mix of both. A category changes the overall pattern of the pile, absolutely, but it doesn't change the possibility of what you might actually find inside. And this is exactly why we can never, ever confuse a group's average tendency with an individual's destiny. Just remember that. Average tendency does not equal individual destiny. Here's another absolutely brilliant way to think about how these multiple causes work together. If you bite into a cake and it tastes incredibly sweet, you can't just point to the sugar and say, aha, that did it alone. No way. The final flavor requires the flour to bind it, the heat to transform it, and the time to actually bake it into something edible. They are totally inseparable. And you know what? Visible human differences are exactly the same. When we see a pattern in how men or women behave, it always comes from several causes combining together: biology, psychology, culture, literally never just one isolated ingredient. And we need to clarify this absolutely perfectly right now, because this is where so many conversations completely derail. A difference does not imply a hierarchy. The word different simply means not the same. The word hierarchy, on the other hand, implies better or worse. It's like a spoon and a fork. They are completely different tools, right? Suited for entirely different tasks, but one isn't morally superior to the other. You wouldn't try to eat soup with a fork. The point is, difference does not imply a value judgment. Okay, let's move into our next section, building a clear mental model connecting the layers. We're going to build a really practical framework here to see how these patterns actually form in real life. So let's systematically break down how these three layers actually interact. First up, biology. This sets the constraints and the capacity range. It basically provides the raw material. Then culture steps in to give meaning to those biological tendencies. Culture is what decides what gets rewarded, what gets suppressed, and how those baseline tendencies are molded into accepted everyday behavior. And finally, psychology is where the individual actually appears. It filters both those biological constraints and the cultural expectations right through a person's unique personality and personal history. The crazy part? All three of these are always operating at the exact same time. And this brilliantly illustrates something I found entirely eye-opening from the source material. Think of biology not as some rigid, inescapable script, but more like a riverbed. Now, the riverbed doesn't choose the water's exact path at every single second, but it strongly shapes where the water can and cannot flow. It provides those constraints. Culture, then, is the water flowing through those channels, adapting and moving within the landscape. Meanwhile, psychology is the unique current actually carving its own specific grooves over time. So, how do you actually diagnose which layer is doing the most work when you see a pattern out in the real world? Well, the source offers this brilliant diagnostic tool. Think of it as the tuning a radio test. If a pattern shifts completely depending on the society you're looking at, like say one country encourages men to be highly emotional while another strictly forbids it, well, culture is doing a lot of the work there. If a pattern appears very early in childhood and stays super consistent everywhere across the globe, biology is likely contributing pretty heavily. And if the behavior varies a ton from day to day based on a person's individual stress or identity, then you're looking at psychology. Let's move to and see how this builds into our final section. Seeing patterns, not boxes. Real-world application. Consider this incredibly common workplace observation for a second. Why is someone quiet in a meeting? Often, people will just rush straight to these surface-level assumptions about gender behaviors here. They might say, well, she's quiet because women are less assertive, or maybe he's quiet because men are stoic. But let's actually challenge that. Let's use our brand new framework. Just look at all the potential causes for that exact same behavior. Are they naturally quiet and introverted? Okay, that's the biological riverbed at work. Have they been socially trained by past bosses or societal expectations to be reserved so they aren't labeled as aggressive? Well, that's culture flowing through. Or maybe they just don't feel safe speaking up in this specific room. Or honestly, maybe they're just profoundly exhausted today. That is pure psychology. The exact same external behavior can stem from drastically different internal roots. When we actually know the layers, we can stop jumping to those lazy conclusions. So the crucial point is this. If you take away just one thing from the source material today, make it this quote: "A real difference is usually a statistical pattern shaped by multiple forces, with lots of overlap between individuals." That one sentence is incredibly empowering. It keeps you honest, and it totally protects you from turning complex human patterns into these rigid, limiting stereotypes. Which leaves us with this final thought. Armed with this new mental model, how will you view the next pattern you see differently tomorrow? Because when you stop relying on fixed boxes and start looking at those overlapping layers of biology, psychology, and culture, you become sharper, you become calmer, and you are far more ready to diagnose reality without all that toxic noise. Our goal today was to build a wholesome, balanced understanding, and I really think we've unlocked exactly that. I hope you found this explainer as fascinating as I did. Keep observing, keep an open mind, and absolutely keep asking great questions.